Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark. And in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Christopher Ray Patton. The first movie I can remember seeing in the theater is Star Wars. And fans who came to that franchise later on used the title that George Lucas decided to add to it, which was A New Hope. Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. We didn't know it was Episode 4 at the time, kids. No idea. It was just, quite simply put, the most amazing thing I had ever seen. And yes, I saw that film in the theater. So 1977 was a big year because not only did Star Wars come out in that year, but other big name films came out that year as well. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And if you're wondering, number one for the box office year that year, yeah, it was Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Close Encounters was number 3. Saturday Night Fever was number 4. Number 7, The Spy Who Loved Me. Number 8 was Oh God. I told you it was a big year, right? It absolutely was a big year. Bet you don't know what number 2 is. If you guessed Smokey and the Bandit, move to the front of the class. Would anyone have been able to guess that? Well, by crackle, you've just been informed. The second highest grossing film of 1977 is Smokey and the Bandit, and $126,737,000. And in case you're wondering, in 2023 money, that's $643 million, kids, for a comedy about cops chasing a dude in a Trans Am. I mean, think about that for a second. To say that this movie got over big is the understatement of the year. I grew up with this film. I can't wait to talk about it. Let's get into it. Smokey and the Bandit is a 1977, yes, of course, American action comedy film starring Burt Reynolds, Sally Field, and an assorted cast of characters, which we're going to get into here today. The film is the first installment of the Smokey and the Bandit trilogy as the start in the Smokey and the Bandit franchise. It is the directorial debut of stuntman Hal Needham, and the film follows Bo Bandit Darville, yes, Bo Darville, in case you were wondering, and Cletus Snowman Snow, 2 bootleggers attempting to illegally transport 400 cases of Coors beer from Texarkana to Atlanta. You almost can't say that without smiling because it sounds utterly ridiculous. Distributed by Universal Pictures, released May 19th, 1977, and nationwide July 29th, 1977. Running time, 96 minutes. The budget for this film, $4.3 million, a paltry $4.3 million. Against its take that year, which was $126 million, and total combined since then, $300 million. And there, kids, is your lowdown for Smokey and the Bandit. So, Chris, I suspect you did not grow up with this film as I did. Maybe you did. But let me ask you this as we get started here. What is it about this film that you like? What is it about it that you keep coming back to in the end?
So, growing up here in Georgia, this is a staple. This is a thing that I believe all kids of my time period. I was born in '88, but this is something that came on for every TBS and TNT movie weekend marathon that you could think of. So this is one that I saw very, very young, probably like 4 or 5 years old. But like, it's just so ingrained in the South and the culture here as far as Smokey and the Bandit. I mean, the majority of it starts in Atlanta, which has a big part of it. Jerry Reed is from Atlanta, or from Georgia, I should say. So I think it's just growing up here. Maybe it has a little more meaning than other places, but I mean, cultural influence in Georgia. I still debate the reason Atlanta traffic seems so crazy to other people is because we learned how to drive based around Smokey and the Bandit and Dukes of Hazzard. So if that's not how you drive, maybe not the best place. But yeah, this was one of my favorites growing up as a kid. I remember like sitting in a box and pretending it was a Trans Am. So big part of my childhood here.
And I know you're in Georgia, but for some reason I didn't connect the dots in my head before we started recording. So of course this film holds a place for you. Wow.
It's kind of funny because when we first started talking about things to do, movies to do, I think I brought up Gator, right? So it wasn't
Yes.
even Smokey and the Bandit, but became Smokey and the Bandit just by degrees of Kevin Bacon, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm telling you, man, if speaking of growing up with films and growing up with franchises or whatnot, anyone of a certain age may not be able to appreciate the magnitude that Burt Reynolds had on the industry, not just on the industry, but on Hollywood, on American pop culture, and to some degree still has today. I mean, icon, I don't even know if it describes the guy. And man, in my opinion, and I've seen a lot of his stuff, this has to be, for me, the coolest thing he ever did was this first film. You know, we had the diminishing returns with the sequels, right? But to me, this stands out head and shoulders. Is this the best Burt Reynolds film in your opinion, or no?
Man, that's tough because I really love Gator.
Hmm.
I guess this is probably the best. This is the one I'm the most nostalgic for. I mean, if you were gonna say his best acting, maybe Deliverance.
Yeah.
You know, but as far as like the movie I think of when I think of Burt Reynolds right off the top of my head, if someone says Burt Reynolds, it's kind of hard not to picture him in the cowboy hat, you know, winking at us out at the Trans Am. So
Great.
It's amazing. He Cannonball Run as well. I don't know. I'm torn. That's a tough one for me.
I love Cannonball Run. Are you freaking kidding me? Such a great movie. Utterly ridiculous. But, and you know, you could argue that the greatest bits of Cannonball Run were the freaking outtakes, not even the movie itself, man. So, him and Dom DeLuise, man. And talking about what he's doing in this movie, dude, he breaks the fourth wall 15 minutes into this film.
Yes.
And I don't think it happens again through the whole movie. It's a very quick little something where he just smiles at the camera and speeds away. I'm like, where did that come from? Oh, it's fun stuff, man. I'll be honest, man. I'd forgotten the plot of this. I'd forgotten the whole Coors beer stuff. I haven't seen this film in a long time.
So yeah, strict laws in Georgia about what kind of beer you could and could not have. The whole plot of this movie is you have you have Big Enos, Burdette, and his son, Little Enos, who is definitely little, hanging out at racetracks, hiring former rodeo people, stuntmen, whoever they could get to try to drive to Texarkana and come back with 400 cases of Coors. And what was it, 48 hours? Wasn't that I believe it, 28 hours. That's what
28 hours.
Back and forth, which, you know, sounds easy, but it's 100 cases of beer or 400 cases of beer. So it's quite a lot. So that the problem with this is that's officially bootlegging and is a federal crime. So that's it seems like everyone has failed. And then he happens upon the bandit laying there in a hammock, his feet kicked up, kind of an old truck rodeo legend, I guess, is the character. I have no idea what the hell a truck rodeo is, though, Tom. I'm not going to lie to you on that one.
No clue. It's rodeo kids with ROADEO, rodeo. I imagine it's I don't know, you're driving around in cars on a dirt track. I really don't know. Like yeah. And you know, you kind of get the impression they already know Bandit. They're talking as if they know him when they walk up, unless it kind of feels like there's a familiarity there. At least they know of him anyway.
It's kind of like the legend precedes him in some sense. I'm assuming that he's known around the truck rodeos and is kind of, you know, maybe a villain of sorts in some people's eyes. They kind of, you know, his best friend's name is Snowman.
Yes.
So
what's that dude transporting?
So it seems like maybe his legend precedes him a little bit.
Yeah. And Chris is right, kids. There was a time you couldn't buy Coors beer east of Oklahoma. And supposedly it would spoil if you took too long to ship it. What the heck are they putting in? You're talking to a guy that knows nothing about alcohol, Chris. Do you know like what What is it about Coors in 1977 that would spoil if you took it too far?
I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it's because the trucks weren't air conditioned
Okay. Yeah.
or frozen, so that I mean, I don't know if it would spoil per se. It might go skunk. I mean, the
Mm,
thing about Coors is they're the Rocky Mountain beer, so it's supposed to be brewed in
right.
Colorado, I believe. It's
Right.
it's made with Rocky Mountain water. That was like their whole gimmick back then.
Right.
The biggest thing here is that just Big Enos seems to have just a stupid amount of money and thinks it's funny to make people try to do this.
I don't remember anything about part 2. I'm sure they probably pop up in part 2 as well, but I assume that he's an oil man and that's where all his money came from.
Part 2, I think, has something to do with them transporting an elephant.
That's right, it does. Oh my God, you're right.
Now, that being
It's an
said, it's been a
elephant.
long time since I've seen part 2, which was not as successful as part 1 or as good. And then the third film, because they did make 3 of these, doesn't
Mhm.
have Burt Reynolds in it. It does not come back for the third one. So obviously, he kind of felt the same way about the sequels, I think, as everybody else did.
And Jerry Reed's a legend, but you want Jerry Reed to carry a Smokey and the Bandit film? Like, I'm not disputing. You know, they obviously wanted Jerry. I don't know the background of why he said yes. I mean, look, he was an actor. He was working actor. He's getting paid. Can't fault him for that. But it's almost like, isn't this too much of a daunting task to ask this guy to carry the part of himself and freaking Burt Reynolds? Like, what? That never made any sense to me at all, man. But I haven't looked into that either. This film, kids, kind of came out of nowhere, directed by Hal Needham, who himself is a stuntman. So it's his first film. It's his directorial debut. For goodness sake. I mean, I don't know, man. It seems like Chris, and there's a great documentary out there, kids, on this. Look it up on the YouTube. It's there. But Chris, it kind of feels like this is one of those films that, like, by hook or by crook, this thing came together and somehow was a monster hit, but almost probably didn't even happen to begin with, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, and the star of the film, Burt Reynolds, initially turned the role down, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
like another kind of thing in the hat. I mean, Hal Needham not only directed this, but was one of the writers for the script. He's not a director. He's like you said, a stuntman or an ex stuntman at this point when they go into making this movie. Originally looking for like a budget of $1 million on this thing that kind of blew up and turned into this huge ordeal. But it kind of follows like the perfect formula of these kind of heavily stunt movies. And the thing that really knocks it out of the park and kind of sets it apart from a lot of these other kind of, let's say, B grindhouse action car movies is just the cast. Um, like the on-screen chemistry between Sally Field, Jerry Reed, and not well, Sally Field and Burt Reynolds, and then Burt Reynolds and Jackie Gleason, who apparently did a lot of improvisation that made a lot of their scenes a lot more funny than how they were written. From everything I've heard through director's commentary and cast commentary over the years on DVDs and such.
Yeah, most of his lines were reportedly improvised, which, guy like Red Fox, Jackie Gleason, I mean, they're like the James Brown of comedy. It's like, what was it they said about Aretha Franklin was that she never sang a song the same way twice. Like, just give her an open mic and let her go. And it's kind of what we get here with him. I can't wait to get into that. But he's freaking great here. We got to start back with the star and work our way. And I don't mean down as anything negative, kids, but across the casting roll call here. But starting back with Burt, I don't know if we have a Burt Reynolds today, Chris. You could maybe say McConaughey to some degree with the style and the swagger and the smile. And I mean, if you're going to remake Smokey and the Bandit, he'd be my pick. I think he'd be effing great. But it'd be hard to duplicate what Burt Reynolds did just by showing up and putting on a cowboy hat, dude. Like, whatever this Bandit character was supposed to have been, he made it what it became and made it iconic. The shirt, the mustache, the hat, the car, the belt buckle, the blue jeans. I mean, he just, My goodness, man. I mean, I can't say enough great things about his performance here. I mean, I imagine at the time this might have been one of those moments where people are like, man, this guy's not bad at all. Because I think in the beginning, he was an ex-football player, wasn't he? If I got that right, I think.
I believe that is the case. Yeah, because he played for Florida State, right? I
I
think
think
I
you're
know he played
right.
college. I
Yeah.
know he played college football. I don't know if he played professional football. And that's part of the reason they casted him in what was it, the longest yard?
Yep, that's true. You're right. It was Florida State University. Yep. No NFL listed, but yeah, he was a football player. But man, he's again, dude, iconic. I mean, you talked about charisma and the chemistry of him on the screen. Dude, all three of the top roles of this movie are cast absolutely pitch perfect, are they not? I mean, I can't see recasting at that time casting anyone but these three actors. I thought they were all great here.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to think of who else you would throw into this role. And like you were saying, even like, is there a modern equivalent to Burt Reynolds? Um, I don't know. Could you see? That's so tough too, because it's like
Mm.
it's a cool without being cool, but it's not to the point where it's like a Steve McQueen. So when you think of
Mm.
like when I think of someone like Ryan Gosling, just coming off that Barbie movie, he's like, oh, he can do the goofy thing, but he can also do the serious Drive thing, like in the movie Drive. But that almost comes off more like a Steve McQueen or Paul Newman than a Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds kind of special in how wacky he is, but and like I said, in Deliverance, for instance, uh, can turn on seriousness if need be. So yeah, I don't know that there's a good modern comparison, or not one that I can think of offhand. But if you're just thinking about actors around that time period, I mean, are we going to talk about The Godfather at all? His replacement.
Oh, do tell.
So he was originally casted. They wanted him to play the role of Sonny Corleone, which he turned on, which went on to have James Caan in the part. But
Mhm.
apparently, according to the Playboy interview that he had turned down that role, which is funny because later on, um, the producer of The Godfather, Albert Ruddy, who's in that new Godfather series, is kind of following his career. He's the one who produced Cannonball Run and Cannonball Run 2. So it does kind of wrap back around to Burt Reynolds.
Can you imagine what a much different film that would have been?
Or if you flipped them, if you flipped the casting, James Caan does Smokey and the
Ooh.
Bandit does the Godfather. What would that world look like?
Wow, I can't even. That hurts my mind trying to think about it. It's somewhere out in the multiverse, Chris. Those things actually happened, and that's what those people got. So in this section of the multiverse, this is what we got. That's crazy. That almost casting business. We've talked a lot about it here on the 6M through the years, but yeah, it's just it's nuts to try to think about, what could have been or whatever. And I mean, plus Burt Reynolds to be in a movie about the Italian mob, and he's born in Lansing, Michigan. Like, not a deal breaker, of course, but yeah, that's I don't know, man. That's that'd be a much different film. And plus, he does have Italian roots, but his family's descended from Dutch, English, and Scottish ancestry. So yeah, I mean, he looks good. He was really good actor. He probably could have pulled it off. Do you think that? How do you think that would have looked with him in Godfather?
Well, so there was rumors that Marlon Brando is the one that kind of kiboshed it
Mm.
a little bit. And if you know anything about the Godfather and what it took to even get Marlon Brando to play play the Godfather himself, it was like a huge ordeal.
Mm.
But apparently, from Burt Reynolds, he basically said like basically he thought him and Brando's had a feud apparently over these years, and he thought that it was because he kind of acted a little bit like Brando, like he took some cues from Brando.
Mm.
Um, and he kind of does have a similar look when he doesn't have the mustache. So if you look at like Burt Reynolds in Deliverance, for instance, I know I keep going back to that. It's one of his earlier, films and one of his more serious films. You could kind of see that, I guess. So if you think about the casting of Sonny, if you've already casted Marlon Brando, it might have made sense look wise. It obviously makes sense more than James Caan, who kind of looks nothing like Marlon Brando.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good call. Good call. Yeah. Talk about a much different Hollywood we're looking at here, kids, at least in these two films are concerned. I mean, we could spend an hour just on Burt, man, because he's just that much of an icon. I mean, the dude does that centerfold in Playgirl, which became infamous. Was that Joe Namath that did that? Or was that Burt?
Was it Playgirl or was it Cosmopolitan? I know that Shawn Michaels later did
Yeah.
the Playgirl with the same pose.
Yes.
Like literally the same pose, but with the title belt. Yeah, but it definitely is the well-known Burt Reynolds pose that was like a big, it launched him into sex symbol status.
Yeah.
And I mean, this guy dated a lot of Hollywood actresses as well.
Lonnie Anderson's the first one that jumps to mind. They were married and had a couple of kids, didn't they?
Oh, I don't know without
I believe. Yeah.
going back through it. I'm sure there's like a whole there's got to be like a whole section. If I was to pull up his IMDb or whatever, I bet there's a whole, or Wicca, I'm sure there's a whole section just of all the people that he dated. One that comes to mind for me is Tammy Wynette, because I just watched that George Jones series and he is portrayed in that film as dating Tammy Wynette when Tammy Wynette and George Jones go through their divorce.
He was married to Lonnie from 88 to 94, and he had a relationship with Miss Sally Field from 76 to 1980, and then off and on as well in 1982. So there you go. In 2016, he publicly said that Sally Field was the love of his life. How about that?
He says that to all the ladies, I'm sure.
That's a good line. That's a good line. I like that. Yeah.
He only takes his hat off for one thing, Tom. He only takes the hat off for one thing.
Yeah, just one thing. That's it. Just the one thing. Speaking of Sally Field, I go back to that bit of Family Guy where I think they're in the car with Bert as the bandit, I think. And Stewie, remember Stewie has a line about, yeah, go get you that Sally Field. All right. He's like really downplaying it. But watching this movie back, dude, I'm sorry. Sally Field has a country girl / small town girl vibe about her. I think she's hot in this movie. I'm sorry, but I think she's great. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, maybe she wasn't a leggy blonde or anything, but this role didn't need that. It needed someone like her, honestly, I think. What do you think about her here?
I mean, I think it's great that they casted Sally Field as kind of for the character that she was playing. It makes perfect sense casting wise. I think she's great. She's supposed to be someone that wanted to be a ballet dancer for the New York Ballet and was marrying a country bumpkin because she didn't know what to do because her plans in life. I mean, like for me, she's perfect. If it was just like the leggy blonde, like your typical 70s grindhouse type film, or like you would later see in some of the other films like Death Race and like the kind of casting that they do in those films, or even some of the Cannonball runs later on, for the character that she's supposed to be playing, I think it's better that she was casted in the way that she was.
And reality in the movies dictates that this girl who didn't know Bandit from anyone steps in front of his car in her wedding dress, gets in his car without introducing herself or anything, and then proceeds to take the dress off and change clothes under the dress with him driving, and doesn't suspect anything bad, trusts the guy automatically without hesitation. That, Chris, is the definition of, Hollywood, bit of Hollywood fluff there that would ever happen in 1977 or 2023. But the dialogue between these two, man, I got to say this, the dialogue between these two is great. The way they play off each other, oh my God, it's awesome, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like I was saying earlier, I think that's what makes the movie stand out, is specifically their back and forth and how, I don't know, it seems like it's weird because they just met each other in the film, but it seems like they'd known each other forever. They're kind of, the way they were able to break each other's balls, for lack of a better term, throughout this film it is great. And then when she kind of gets more into it, the further down this lawless path they're going, trying to escape these sheriff, it gets better and better. She becomes almost more Southern. She starts getting on the CB radio, which is great.
Frog.
Yeah, gets her own handle.
Yeah.
Frog, which I am assuming is a reference to her legs, considering everyone else has a name out here.
Yeah. And by the way, kids, Sally Field's a national treasure. I won't have her good name besmirched on my little podcast because she's effing great. And honestly, one of the best Aunt Mays of all time, if I'm being honest. But she's such a good actress, man. She could pull off anything, honestly.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, and when I think of other movies that she was in, like right offhand, she's Forrest Gump's mom, right?
She
So
is.
those are two roles I immediately think of is Smokey and the Bandit and Forrest Gump's mom.
Yeah, gosh. I can't say I've forgotten about that, but it wasn't even in my head. But yeah, wow. She was Forrest Gump's mom. And do anything for her boy's education. I'm just saying.
Such a great movie.
No kidding. Let's talk about the other icon in this film, Mr. Jerry Reed, who at the time of this movie was like 40 and he looked 60. But to be fair, Jerry Reed looked 60 most of his life. I bet when he was 18, he looked 60 is my guess. You know what I'm saying? He just got that look. He just looks weathered to me. He looks like a piece of leather. You know what I mean? Like he just looks like Jerry Reed looks world weary most of the time I've ever seen him. Do you know what I mean? It's crazy, man, but he's awesome here, actually.
Yeah, one of my favorite guitar players of all time.
He's so good. Yeah.
He's phenomenal. And him and Chet are two of my favorite guitar players for sure. And watching those two perform together, let's get into I'll get the music stuff out of the way and then get back to his storied acting career. But an absolute incredibly great musician, and it has done a lot more music than you actually would think. Like, for instance, he did a lot of guitar tracks for Elvis, one that you may have heard of, Crazy Little Thing Called Love. That's Jerry Reed on guitar. So really great musician, one of my favorites, and absolutely perfect for this role in the sense that he doesn't want to go to begin with. And kind of carries over through his crotchety old man character throughout the entire film. And I'm always a sucker for, Fred the dog. We can't leave him out of the casting. Burt Reynolds' dog, Fred, and Jerry Reed's relationship, the snowman's relationship with his dog. One of my favorite things about the movie.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I mean, I think Snowman's a great handle. And I grew up with this movie. It's one of those movies I grew up with, just like I grew up with A New Hope. But these nicknames and these faces and the voices and the music, like absolutely part of my childhood, man. It's one of the things I love about this. What is it about him and Bert together that works so well? What is it that you see from where you're sitting that strikes you as like, oh, this is a perfect casting with these two guys playing against each other?
I think that they were just actual friends.
Mm.
I mean, that's the only explanation I could come up with. Because later, if you go into, like I said, Gator, you have Jerry Reed's in most of those southern films as well.
Mm-hmm.
Gator specifically, he's a dirtbag in that movie. You'll hate Jerry Reed if you go and watch that film. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it, honestly. And I don't know, maybe they just like getting drunk together. If I had to take a guess of why it works so well on the screen, I'm assuming that they were just partying it up. But for whatever reason it worked, and they do come off like they've been good friends for a long time. Because even in the film, like, Burt Reynolds has no problem like picking up his kids and like walking in and waking him up out of bed, and like so I think that's part of it. That's probably why it worked as well as it did. That, and they probably didn't have to pay him as much for Eastbound and Down, the title track of this movie.
Let it all hang out, 'cause we got a thirsty in Atlanta, and this beer in Texarkana, we'll bring it back no matter what it takes. Well, Eastbound and Down, I'm loaded up and tricky. We gon' do what they say can't be done. Got a long way to go in this short time to get there. Well, I'm eastbound, watch old Bandit run. Yeah, I'm eastbound, watch old Bandit.
Oh man, what a great song! Because he had two versions, Eastbound and Westbound, and they played both versions in the film, didn't they? Played one near the beginning and one near the end.
They do. He also has the love song in this movie, which is like,
Yeah.
that's why they call him the Bandit. Which
Yeah.
is- it explains all about the bandit in the song.
He's narrating the character as the character is on screen. Yeah, it's like the legend of I don't know, Huckleberry Finn or something. Like you got the narrator sitting there telling you about it. I had this. I told you this off mic before we started, but I had this soundtrack on cassette tape, and I absolutely wore it out. I would let it play, flip it over, play the. I mean, it just. Yeah, I mean, holy God, I couldn't get enough of it. Jerry Reed was awesome. I had some of his vinyl as a kid as well because my mom was a fan. So yeah, just an icon. I don't know how many people we have walking around right now that we can compare to Jerry Reed, for goodness sake. Like there's probably someone I'm not thinking of, but somebody who's not only a great musician and got a real ear for music, but is funny, is witty, is charming, can be a villain, like you said, or can be the good guy that you're pulling for. I mean, multifaceted, man. Hey, kids, Tom Clark here, and did you know the very podcast you're listening to right now is available on boinkstudios.com. BOINK, Boink Studios is the home of Tom Clark's Main Event, Tom Clark's 6M podcast, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Visit the site today for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Check out the site and bookmark today, boinkstudios.com. They don't make them like this anymore. Can we just go ahead and say that right now?
That's the one thing about Jerry Reed is even through his music, it's kind of the character he's playing in this movie is kind of who he is throughout his songwriting. Like whether it's a song like "She Got the Gold Mine, I Got the Shaft," for instance, or one that probably more people know, Amos Moses. He kind of is goofy. You know, he's kind of a goofy guy. Lordy Lord, Mr. Ford. It's kind of a goofy guy, and it plays into the character. But yeah, I can't think of anyone that's like Jerry Reed. I can tell you guitar players that are like, you know, have similar playing styles as Jerry Reed. But as far as the crossover appeal and all of that, I don't know. That's a hard one. You see it more with professional wrestling than you do with musicians, I guess.
You know, you really do. That's an excellent call because we've seen musicians, you know, try to cut their teeth in acting, and it doesn't go so well all the time. But and let's be honest, it doesn't always go great for wrestlers either. But these guys are more accustomed to being in front of the camera and knowing how to deliver lines, knowing when to wait and when to speak, and to read the room. Like, I mean, no wonder it's easier to some degree. I would suspect it's easier for wrestlers to get in than it is musicians. That's a good call. And speaking of Eastbound and Down, the story goes Hal Needham asked Jerry to write a theme song for the film, and a couple of hours later, get that? Reed presents the song to Hal. He's got an acoustic, he starts playing it, and Needham stops him from playing. And of course, Jerry thinks he doesn't like it. So he's like, look, if you don't like it, I'll rewrite it. Hal Needham supposedly says, if you change one note, I'll kill you. So he knew immediately the song was going to be a hit. And the guy's an ex-stuntman turned director. What would he know? But I guess he knew enough to say, this is perfect for this movie.
It's crazy to think about the career of Jerry Reed and everyone that he worked with. But that's such a fun story. I love Jerry Reed so much.
I do too, yeah.
I think the problem when you were talking about musicians in modern day, like they always just get casted as a musician. Or they get casted into a movie where they have to sing. Like, for instance, Lady Gaga, I guess, outside of the American, horror stories, which they just apparently cast anybody now on that show.
Yeah.
But outside of that, the first they put her in, like, was it Be a Star, Born a Star, or Star is Born?
Star is Born, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So that's the kind of movies, or like Taylor Swift's first acting debut was in that terrible Cats film. It seems like they try to shovel musicians into music-related films.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we'll ever get the opportunity to see musician cross over in the way that Jerry Reed does. But with Jerry Reed, it kind of, like I said, it plays out in the kind of music that he wrote a lot, like his kind of comedic timing and how he could play that character.
Totally agree. Good point. And plus, we had to say, kids, don't know if I knew this till, rewatching this movie again, looking some stuff up here, but Jerry was hired to play the Bandit, which is what a different world that would have been. But when Hal Needham told Burt Reynolds about the film, Reynolds decided, hey, I'd love to do this. And so they just moved Jerry to the snowman role. I'm going to be honest with you, man. We'll never know now. I think Jerry would have pulled this off in a heartbeat. Now, it would have been a different movie because he's a different guy. But would it have been number 2 in the box office that year? Maybe not, because Burt had star power. But I bet it still would have been a highly entertaining movie had Jerry been the Bandit, man.
I think so too, but it would have been weird. I don't know. I don't want to think about it too hard because I love the combination of Burt and Jerry as Bandit and Snowman. Snowman being the scared of getting in trouble by his wife role fits Jerry Reed kind of perfectly to a T.
It does fit him. Yeah. Like, again, it's hard to go back and retrocast these roles, man. But because he was so great. He is Cletus Snow, by the way, kids, in case we haven't mentioned. Sally's character was named Carrie. We never got a last name for Carrie for whatever reason, but yeah. Again, if you screw up any of the 3 of those castings, this is not the same movie. Number 4 on the casting, a guy that at the time I would suspect no one would have no one even could have speculated he would do something like this, is Jackie Gleason as Sheriff Buford Justice, which that's how you have to say it. It's a law. Dude, what do you know about him? What did you know about him when you first started watching this movie? Did you know anything about him outside of this movie? Were you familiar with the Honeymooners or no?
I was not familiar with the Honeymooners. This is one of those things where I'm watching it as a kid and my grandparents are like, he was on the Honeymooners or what. It was like one of those kind of things. So I probably wouldn't have seen an episode of the Honeymooners until later on, like Nick at Night type stuff.
Right.
So as far as I knew, Jackie Gleason's only performance was the Sheriff and Smokey and the Bandit, which I loved. So
yeah, I can't say I grew up with the Honeymooners, not that old, but it was, my mom would occasionally reference it or say something. And then when it hit, well, like you said, when it hit Nick at Night, then it became a recurring thing on TV. And then it kind of started creeping into my surroundings and I started becoming aware of it and started watching it and just marveling at how effing phenomenal this guy was. Like, Jackie Gleason, just a god among men. Honest to goodness, he is. Like, maybe some of the backstage stories aren't always kind through the years, but dude, you can't argue with what the guy brought to the screen. There is in no way on no planet is he miscast as Sheriff Justice. The voice is great. The impersonations you could do from this movie, just from him alone. Freaking off the chart. Hey, you're in Georgia there, Chris. You ever run into any sheriffs that sound like this guy or what?
I try not to run into any sheriffs.
Period. Right.
Period. If I can avoid it. No. But I think he is from Tennessee in the film. So I think he's doing more of a Tennessee accent, right? Isn't that the whole thing? Because he's not a Georgia State Trooper, because that becomes a thing later in the film where they're like, what's this guy doing?
That's a good call. Yeah. Yeah.
Because even if at some point, even if he arrests the Bandit, the crime is like speeding. So he's been tracking and evading the law. But what we're dealing here is a complete lack of respect for the law, Tom.
Absolutely. That's painfully obvious. You bring up a good point. He had no idea about Snowman and the larger thing at play here. He only knew about this dude in the Trans Am. That was it, right?
So yeah, it became evident when they start blocking the other police,
Yeah.
and they kind of pick up on the fact that, especially when they start getting back towards Georgia, because the Georgia State Troopers just have to keep arresting these people that Enos is sending out to get coors, I guess. But yeah, throughout most of the movie, he doesn't even know what the bandit looks like. We have that great moment in the movie where Burt Reynolds and Jackie Gleason are just having a conversation while waiting to get cheeseburgers and Dr. Pepper, I think it was. It's hilarious. It's so good. So he doesn't even know who the bandit is through most of the movie, or why he's chasing him, other than he's got Frog, which is supposed to be his son's future wife.
And the amount of detail we got on that, I couldn't make heads or tails of it, because her story of what happened, you have to go back and watch it a couple of times and take notes, because it's utter nonsense, the stuff that she says. I'm thinking, what just happened? Like, I had to go back and listen to it again, her explanation. I was completely lost. I'm like, come on, I pay attention. How did I miss this? So we never get like the full picture, but it has to be said about the cafe scene you just mentioned. That was all Jackie Gleason's idea. That was not even in the script. Which is freaking great.
That's amazing, because it's such a great scene. It's man, I didn't know that was one of the things they improv, but that's great.
And he was a Texas lawman, Chris, not Tennessee, which means he followed him from Texas to Georgia. Is that crazy? How many hours is that, you think? I don't even know.
Well, they go to Texarkana to pick up the beer.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they cut across Texas because they would be in Arkansas.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Unless they were getting. Okay, now I'm going to be confused on maybe the wedding was in Arkansas for some reason, and he is a Texas lawman that just happened to be in Arkansas, because the way it comes across is that he is, I don't know. It's better not to think about the intricacies of Smokey and the Bandit, I think. As a film.
Do you mean, are you suggesting the intricacy, one of which, that the car is somehow still in one piece by the end of this film with not a scratch on it?
Well, I mean, he's the Bandit, dude.
Well, I mean, what was I thinking? Of course. Yeah, of course. It's his lightsaber. I mean, of course he's still got it and it still works. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, so supposedly, right, they were on his tail because they were following her because she ran out on the wedding. So she drove far enough. I guess that would make sense.
Oh yeah, because her car is broke. She stole Junior's. Okay, yes, that checks out. Okay,
yeah.
Yes. Her story of why she left, from what I was able to gather through the many times of seeing this film, is that she wanted to be a professional dancer. That didn't work out. She ended up in Texas dating this guy who proposed to her.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a life-changing moment of like, I don't really want to do this. I feel more sad about my dream not coming true. And then she just kind of bailed on the wedding, right? Like, because she does go through like dancing on the dashboard and kind of giving that story. But like you said, it's not a big part of this movie, really.
No, it's not even consequential to the story. They barely ever reference it. I mean, they mention it he talks about it to his son a couple of times, but yeah. And plus, look, this may be one of the reasons why it didn't matter all that much, Chris, is actually because it was Jackie Gleason's idea to have the Junior character to begin with. It was his call. Because he said, supposedly, I can't be in the car alone. Put me someone in there for me to play off of. So this movie, may not have even had the original storyline with Sally Field. Could have just been a girl that showed up. Maybe her car was just broken down and he helped her or picked her up. And maybe there was no connection until Jackie Gleason suggested it.
Oh, that would be a terrible movie.
Right. Yeah. Just some random girl. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, terrible is probably not the right. It would still be fun, I'm sure, but it would not be what Smokey and the Bandit is.
Speaking of his son, Mike Henry. I'll bet none of you knew that guy's name because I sure didn't. He is he's actually, we lost him in 2021. We've lost everyone in this film except Sally Field. Haven't we? At least the top cast. None of them are no longer with us. Isn't that crazy?
Little Enos is still alive.
Oh, there you go. Paul Williams. Yeah. If you listen, kids, if you know anything about the old Muppet Show, you know who Paul Williams is. He was quite the fixture in music.
I did not know that he had written so many songs. That's a musician connection there, I'm assuming, between him and Jerry Reed.
Oh, man. Paul Williams was prolific. I'll tell you I grew up with him, but I don't mean that in the sense of it. I mean it in the sense of his name and face were kind of everywhere when I was a kid growing up. So I kind of knew already who he was and then got older and started digging a little bit more into people that you're kind of aware of. And yeah, he was a prolific songwriter for sure.
No, we're wrapping all the way right back around because he wrote the main theme from A Star Is Born, starring Barbra Streisand.
Well, there you go. See there? Yeah. Good actor too, by the way. But we got to mention also Buford's son, the late Michael Henry, was most well known for portraying Tarzan in 3 1960s films. I did not freaking know that at all.
This is like one of those weird casting things where it's like the director really leaned on other people in the cast to bring actors in, it seems like, because he also was in The Longest Yard.
He was
the Stone Cold Steve Austin character, from what I can see. If you've seen the more recent Longest Yard, he's playing the corrupt prison guard in the 1974 movie, which I've never seen. I have never seen that version of The Longest Yard.
I've seen bits and pieces, but it's on my to-watch list, and I just have not got to it yet. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. He's holding his dad's hat on when the hood of the car gets ripped off. Remember that they get out and they're walking and he's still holding it. And Gleason just stops and gives him this look like, you freaking moron. Like he's still holding the freaking hat, dude.
Every time his son says something dumb, Gleason has a great quip. And one of them I hit you with before the beginning of this show, which is, when I get home, I'm going to punch your mama square in the mouth.
So good. There is. Because he's so adamant when he tells him, there is no way that you could come from my loins. Because he can't take it anymore, Chris. He's beside himself. I've spent 40 years with this clown. There's no way this guy's my son. 30 years, whatever.
Yeah, and he's paying. I'm sure he's paying for this wedding that's not happening, which does not sit well with him either.
No. Yeah, Paul Williams, who is still with us. Yeah, you're right. Like you said, he's still with us. Yeah, dude, he was around for a long time, man. I mentioned Muppet Show. I think it was like John Denver was a staple of the Muppet Show as well. So it was very much of that time frame, that time period of guest stars on the Muppet Show. And his partner is Big Enos, Pat McCormick, had a big career in Hollywood too. I mean, the guy was like, what is it? He was 6'7" and had the walrus mustache and just had a very recognizable face. Dude, go look at his credits, man. They start in 1970 and end in 92, for crying out loud. So he had a long career, man.
Yeah.
Long career.
I'm wondering, I am flipping through his credits just to see what else he's been in that I should have noticed him in. God, he has been in a lot. Oh, he was in Scrooged. He was the ghost of Christmas Present. There you go.
Yeah, good stuff. And I'm telling you, kids, if you've seen any TV from the past 22 years or movies or whatnot, if you don't know his name, you'll know him. You'll know a picture of him because you'll be like, I recognize that guy from something. He just got one of those faces, man. Plus, he did so much stuff. There you have it, kids. There is the majority of the important cast that you need to know about. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody's getting along great. Everything is just you know, you were saying earlier about don't get too wrapped up in the intricacies of this. This is just a fun movie, man. I mean, if you really wanted to break this down, I think the gay slur is mentioned one time by Sheriff Justice. It's very quick, which, you know, it is what it is. I'm not going to do one of those things. It's a product of its time. He does call the African American sheriff boy, and then he tells his son, "What's this world coming to?" I mean, Chris, I guess if you wanted to pick this thing apart, you could take those two instances and say something. And the idea of Bandit being a testosterone-filled character and she's a damsel in distress, but like, I guess I'm biased, man, because I grew up with this and I love this movie to death, man. I don't bump into anything too much myself. Do you?
No, not really. And I mean, to be fair, Jackie Gleason's not supposed to be a good guy in this film to begin with. So
that's fair.
This is kind of the lines you would expect a crazy sheriff chasing someone across county lines to potentially say. Maybe his character should have ran for president. I don't know.
Hey, you might be onto something there. You might be on. There's precedent now, right? There's precedent now. So,
but no, all kidding aside, I mean, I'm not, like you said, I don't think it's necessary to call it a product of its time. But there's not anything that's so offensive that you would say this film should be canceled or something that I would tell, if you were sensitive to that, tell you not to watch. I think it's just, it kind of is what it is. This is actually, in comparison to a lot of these car films, this one is fairly PG.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, one of the things that strikes me is you can make a film today with those themes in it and with that sort of language. And we all understand its characters. But because it's 25, 30, 40 years old or older, we go, oh, look at that. I'm like, do you think that every actor believed everything he or she was saying? They are playing characters. Like, I won't get into it. It's odd to me, though, that certain things get passes while other things don't. I don't get that, but okay.
Yep. Nope. Totally agree on that one. One of my favorite scenes in this movie, it goes back to Fred, is when they're stopped on the side of the road and Jerry Reed's yelling at the dog and the dog's like, "Fred, this is no time for a swim."
Yeah.
And he's like waiting out in the middle of this fishing pond to get this giant basset hound, who is the actual star of the film. Fred's a good boy.
Yeah.
But that scene, and then when they pick on his dog in the bar and he gets beat down by a bunch of bikers and then decides to plow his truck over all their motorcycles, which is great.
So good. I feel bad for that dog, man. We only see him eat one time, and that's the cheeseburgers. That was it.
It's only 28 hours, man.
Still. I mean,
he did eat a sack full of cheeseburgers.
Great dog. Yeah.
Yeah, that crazy fact, I didn't know this until today, is that was Burt Reynolds' actual dog.
I had no idea about that either, actually.
So that was funny. A fun little thing I learned today, going back through some of these notes and different articles about this film.
Well, speaking of food, Jackie Gleason, this is some great trivia tidbits here for you kids. Jackie Gleason would ask his assistant Mal for a hamburger, which was code for a glass of vodka. How about that? Jeez. That is an old Hollywood actor right there, Chris, that on the set, bring me a glass of vodka over here. You know, it's crazy.
I also like that they refer to all restaurants throughout the film on the CB radio as a choke and puke.
Yes. That's good.
This movie came before Convoy, right?
I think so, and I totally know Convoy. Totally, because I love that film as well.
This movie kicked off it's kind of cool to be a truck driver. So yeah. I guess you can thank the Bandit and Snowman for that, because we got a kind of a bunch of these after that. What's the Clint Eastwood? Clint Eastwood has one, right? Where he's driving a semi-truck.
I think you're right. Convoy was 78, so it was a year later. Convoy was directed by Sam Peckinpah. I don't know if I knew that. That guy directed Convoy?
Yeah, in 78, we also get Every Which Way But Loose.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Prize fighter, truck driver, Clint Eastwood.
Yes. Yeah.
So
God.
this movie kicked off a lot of things in Hollywood, some for better, some for worse, I think.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. Isn't that the way it always goes? But yeah, listen, just as iconic as the hat and the shirt and the mustache and the belt buckle and the denim jeans is the car. Like, just as iconic. I mean, it says something that the Pontiac Trans Am became the best-selling car of the year this movie was released. So, sales, this is a good one. Sales jumped from around 68,000 in 1977 to 93,000 in 1978. And a year later, 117,000. Dude.
I mean, is there a better car commercial though for any car than this? I mean, I think you could have probably put any car in there and it would have worked. It's just, it kind of fits the Bandit with the big gold eagle on the hood. Not as talked about, but the actual trailer of Snowman's semi is pretty awesome. It's got like this huge wild western scene painted on the side of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's some cool there, and there's a ton of cool cars when they start doing the blocking of the police towards the home stretch. There, you get a lot of like really old. If you're into muscle cars, there's a ton of muscle cars, tons of Jeeps, tons of other semis with crazy things painted on the side of them. That had to be the most expensive part of this entire movie, is like the cars.
Love it. That, I'll be honest with you, man, in the game of, hey, you can own one Hollywood car, what car would you pick? I might be picking the Bandit's Trans Am, dude. I mean, a kit from Knight Rider, sure. One of the Batmobiles, sure. But dude, that Trans Am's fire, man. It'd be hard for me to pick against that. I'll be honest with you.
It's a pretty cool car. I don't know. I might go with Paul Walker's Supra from the first Fast and the Furious. It'd either be that or the Trans Am. The Trans Am, one of the two.
Yeah.
Trans Am seems like if you had a very nice one, it seems like something that you could drive every day without it being a hassle. So that's one. You know, if you get a Batmobile, like, you can't really drive that to the office every day.
Well, then again, there's Steve McQueen's Mustang from Bullitt. Holy God. Woo. Yeah. That might be harder than I thought.
Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds. That's
oh, yeah.
That's up there as well.
Yeah. God, there's a whole podcast right there, man. Hollywood
Favorite
rides.
Movie cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets kind of knocked down by Fast and the Furious though, because there's like a bazillion good cars in those, but I don't actually consider them, with the exception of like the first film, I don't consider them as like true hero cars, because they drive so many in the other films. You know, it's like they switch so many. Whereas like in the first film, you're like, okay, it's Paul Walker's Eclipse, and then you have the Supra, and those are like the two, and then I guess the Charger at the end, but that gets hit by a train, so I definitely don't want that one. Seems like bad luck.
Yeah, really. Yeah, no kidding. It's crazy, man. There's so much good stuff in here, and so many funny bits. I mean, again, to me, the dialogue is great. I mean, a couple things, and again, this goes back to Hollywood science, but the idea that by the time that truck pulls in at the end and they've made their destination, they're 10 minutes early, right? So they've made their time. If you sit there with a straight face and tell me that every bottle of beer is intact in the back of that truck, I will call you a liar to your face. Okay.
You have to assume that they just took more than they actually should have as a just in case, because they definitely did not pay for it. They did not have time to pay for it. They robbed the liquor store in which they picked the alcohol up from to begin with, and left a handwritten note saying, "Hey, get in contact with Big Enos." Imagine that guy's day when he walked in. He's like, "What?"
And I wonder what happened after the Bandit and Carrie and Snowman pulled off, because the cops pulled in behind the rig. So, like, again, I don't remember part two. Did Enos and his little Enos get arrested?
No. they continue the chase in part 2. Because if
Ah,
you remember, at the very end of the movie, the sheriff pulls up and his car is just so busted it can't really continue on,
right.
and they take Big Enos's Cadillac and they yell something like, he gives them another challenge, and they go double or nothing. So that was supposed to be like the start of the next movie. Now, how they went from what they were supposed to be doing at that point to delivering an elephant, no clue. 'Cause that was
Yeah.
definitely not. So you have to assume that they just have continuously been doing this the entire time, I guess.
And I don't know if I put this together either. This is random. The Dukes of Hazzard. So Sonny Schroyer, who is Enos, and John Schneider, of course, is Bo. They were, let's see, I think they were both in this movie. And like in very brief clips, I guess.
Oh, Bo
Yeah.
and Luke from Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah. And also Cooter, the guy, Ben Jones, who played Cooter Davenport in Dukes of Hazzard, had a small clip in this as well. That's funny. There's another show I grew up with, man. A highly improbable TV show of car that can do magnificent, incredible things. Car straight out of the
Yeah.
MCU.
This one is
Jesus.
not as ridiculous as some of the other ones, and I think that is because it had a stuntman as a director, so maybe he took in consideration of how much it was going to cost them if they destroyed all these cars.
Mhm.
Because the Trans Am, it put it this way, it is not doing the Dukes of Hazzard every episode, right? Like throughout this movie, it is mostly a bunch of trail driving and sick burnouts by the Bandit himself, but the police car definitely takes quite a beating, for sure.
Mm. Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes is when they're driving through the baseball field.
Oh, it's so good, dude.
It's like, because in my mind I can just think, like, when I was a kid, even when I was playing like t-ball and I would see that part of the movie, I was like, how funny it would be if that happened in real life.
Oh my God. And he's telling her, watch these kids, be careful.
This movie
Oh.
just holds such a special place in my heart, both nostalgia wise and just definitely is one of the reasons I love cars as much as I do. It has
Mm.
a lot to do with Smokey and the Bandit. It's up there. If I was thinking about childhood favorites, this would definitely be in my top 10, if not my top 5, right up there with Terminator 2. That was another one of my faves.
Yeah. Terminator 2's in the archives, kids. Go listen to it. Yeah. I'm so glad we did this because I freaking love this movie. I'd forgotten so much of it. And it's one of those movies I think you could spend a couple, maybe 2 or 3 hours on just relating stories and talking about scenes and favorite things about it. But in true Hollywood fashion, in true movie studio fashion, I think they like cut the budget for this thing as it was being made. And, as always, Chris, the freaking studios get in the way of something great happening. Supposedly, Universal, after viewing a final cut of the film, thought that the country score and soundtrack wasn't good. So they decided to change it and replace it with an orchestral score until Hal Needham hated it so much, he told him to keep it out and keep the original. Can you imagine this movie with a freaking orchestra playing behind it? My God, dude.
No, it would be terrible. Which you would think Universal would know, because didn't Universal do Dukes of Hazzard as well?
That's a good point.
I mean, I could be wrong. I'll look that up and verify, but I thought that was a Universal joint.
Dude, just leave it up to stuffy old white dudes in suits sitting behind a big table to tell you what's cool and what isn't cool. Okay, sure.
Okay. Dukes of Hazzard actually started later. So it was released in 1979. So maybe they learned from the Bandit, I guess.
There you
Who
go.
would have thought? I thought for some reason it was before then, but
Yeah, I mean, there again, let's get in the way of something fun and cool that's happening. Couple last minute things here. This is cool. I would have never had any idea about this. In season 7, episode 10 of The Walking Dead that aired February 19th, 2017, Daryl and Richard are standing in front of the trailer that the snowman drove in Smokey and the Bandit when they're preparing an attack on the Saviors. You
I
kidding
totally
me?
remembered that, and I marked out for it pretty hard.
That's so
when
cool.
it happened. Yeah, it's that iconic like Western trailer that I was talking about earlier. It's really
Nice.
cool. I wonder, is it does that notate if it's the original trailer from the film, or if someone has just been out here painting these?
I don't have that in front of me, but I don't know. You kind of assume maybe someone ended up with that trailer, like, and just maybe stored it in their yard or stored it in a warehouse somewhere just to say they had it. I don't know. I don't know what the story is behind that. It'd be interesting to know. But yeah, and another tidbit about these things that are improbable. There's several scenes where there's the big rig is trailing behind full speed behind and making the turns behind the Bandit car. Okay, let's just, all right. If you tell me that's an actual trailer and not something made of tin with wheels and all the weight took out of it so we could make that turn, I don't know. For some reason that stuck with me today. I'm like, oh, come on. And it didn't look like the film had been sped up at all. I'm like, how did that truck make that turn?
It helps. I guess it helps when the director's a stunt man, right? He's like,
Very true.
Get some really good people to come work on this one. Yeah, it's kind of insane.
So CBs, by the way, I got to throw this in. I again, showing my age, I loved CBs, man. I loved it. Like, it was the coolest thing. It was like smartphones before there were smartphones, right? To me, it was awesome. Like, getting on there and you had a handle and you were talking to people you didn't know and stuff. What about this idea that all these CB folks in this movie are getting wind of the Bandit in this chase and are helping him out? What do you think about that? I
mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I don't know that would be my reaction if I was on a CB radio. But, they kind of do this same exact thing at the end of Fast and the Furious 2 in a kind of a different way, but it is very similar. So I don't know. It works. It's fun in the movie, but yeah, if it was me, I don't necessarily know. It is crazy that apparently, like, reading through some things this morning, this spun off like a whole culture of CB radio where people are getting these installed in their cars like normal.
Right.
And kind of like what you're saying, it's like AOL chat room before AOL chat room. It kind of sounds like.
That's a great comparison, actually. Yeah. That's dead on. Dead on. And in case anyone out there was wondering where this Smokey thing came from, because for the longest time I didn't know either. So it dates back to Smokey being a CB radio slang for state troopers and members of the U.S. Forest Service because of their hats. So that's where it came from. That's fun stuff.
Oh, because they look like Smokey the Bear.
Yeah, there you go. Isn't that funny? Well, there you have it, kids. There's Smokey and the Bandit. Don't be looking for part 2. I don't know if we're going to get there. Possibly. All right, fine. Keep your eyes up. You might see it eventually. But I'll bet you won't see part 3 because reasons. So,
I mean, I would say we do like White Lightning and Gator if we're going to continue down the Burt Reynolds path of cool flicks. But yeah, the second one, I might have to rewatch it. It's been years. I watched this on DVD because I own a copy of this, and I actually have the 3-piece set I got from Walmart when I was in high school that has all 3. So, if need be, pop in Smokey and the Bandit 2. But I kind of, from what I remember, I don't recall loving it, even as a kid.
Yeah, we've reviewed less than stellar sequels here on the 6M, so it might be something we get to later. But we shall see. There's always the original Longest Yard, and we've done the remake here on the 6M with Adam Sandler, so that's something that might be worth doing. And of course, as you said, Gator is a fine film, so that might be something to definitely tackle at some point. So Burt Reynolds left behind a nice filmography, kids. Go out of your way to check this guy out if you didn't grow up with him. If you're not that familiar with his work, now's the time. Go check him out. Go check out Jerry Reed, for goodness sake. Go check out Sally Field, man. So stellar cast, great movie, fun movie, very very nostalgic for this film, in case anyone couldn't tell here at the end. But let's try to wrap this up, my friend. So, Chris, give me your last word on Smokey and the Bandit.
Wonderful film. Big part of my childhood. Definitely worth a watch. I think it inspired a lot of other movies that you probably like if you like car type films like this. If you haven't seen Smokey and the Bandit, definitely check it out. And if you haven't seen Cannonball Run, check that out as well. Go through a deep dive of cool Burt Reynolds car films.
Oh man, Cannonball Run might be the next film we do here. I don't know that. Whew. Love Cannonball Run, man. So yeah, the girls in the fast car. Are you kidding me? The freaking 10-year-old in me.
Now, I will say this about Cannonball Run. It has some issues with streaming, so like trying to find somewhere to even buy that can be a bit of a hassle. Last time I got a hankering for wanting to watch that 3 or 4 years ago, and it was not streaming anywhere. I ended up having to buy it off Amazon for like $25 because it was out of print at the time.
That's some good information. If you have a YouTube Premium subscription, Part 2 is available in their selection of movies, but not Part 1, which is odd.
Yeah. So watch that however you can. I think when companies make that way too hard, I'm not promoting that you pirate something, but maybe you should pirate that if you need to.
Ahoy. That's all I can say. I mean, I would say these guys have made their money for F's sake. So yeah, let us watch some cool stuff at the end of the day. So stay tuned, kids, for more. Keep your eyes open for some great Burt Reynolds content in the coming future. I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about this guy, and it definitely wasn't the first. So again, keep tabs and keep following along. And once we make it, you'll see it. Then you can check us out. And in the meantime, that is Smokey and the Bandit. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.